Hello and welcome. This video will present a technology overview of Relay workflow for Oracle and Oracle Application Express. In this presentation, I'll discuss some of the basic concepts of workflow and its purpose in business applications. I'll also cover some experiences on how workflow is achieved in Application Express today and how Relay can change the way Apex apps are developed in the future. We'll talk about some of the elements of workflow and how they operate, and then see a bit of Relay in action. The main goal of workflow is to automate a business process by producing a repeatable method of handling the records and routing them through that process. The employment of a workflow engine reduces errors and lag times by enabling data-based solutions, decisions, and removing non-essential human interactions and automating updates to the record quickly. When a human element is involved, it's designed to get the right information to the right person at the right time, every time. My goal here was to make it simple, make it intuitive and functional, to make it possible for a designer to create workflow for an application and not need to be a programmer or business process analyst. Finally, the goal was to keep end-user interaction with workflow down to quick, effective steps that don't interfere with their actual work. My experience with Apex and business processes is that applications are largely designed to follow their process and implement it through page transitions and coding within the app. And this has been successful to a point, but very often creates issues. Using this method, if a process changes a little, it can cause a change to the application. If it changes a lot, it can cause a redesign of the entire application. By separating application flow and workflow, the benefits gained are streamlined applications that can focus on functionality central to the data, while allowing one or more business processes to be executed against a record. When a workflow process is changed, it should not have to impact the application. Likewise, when the application changes, the impact to the process can be minimized as well. So what is Relay? It's a graphically operated, metadata-driven workflow engine written in PL SQL and implemented for the user in Oracle Application Express. Like Apex, it exists as a service on the Oracle database and can be used by multiple schemas and Apex workspaces while securely segregating data. Relay was originally designed around traditional flow diagram shapes and purpose. We'll call it the IBM notations. In fact, many of us still have the ink stencils for this notation. This notation is commonly understood and simple to learn. It can also be used to create simple and complex process representations. Anyone who's ever used Microsoft Visio has likely become familiar with these process shapes. Another question asked is why not use BPMN? To put it simply, my goal was to keep it simple, functional, and the current state of BPMN does not lend itself well to ease of use, understanding, and low cost of entry. It's a tool for process engineers and analysts that requires more references and experience to get it right, and I felt it would be a turnoff to the average developer looking for a simple workflow solution. In keeping with the example of Application Express, I wanted to reduce the cost of entry aspect of workflow and keep it as simple as possible. So from the designer's perspective, the basic skills required are basic understanding of SQL and knowledge of their business processes. From an application developer's perspective, the steps required to integrate with Relay are pretty well within any Apex developer's ability. From the end user's perspective, they should only have to do their job, make decisions, and carry on. So now let's look at some of the elements of Relay and workflow. The process in Relay is fairly simple. You create a diagram, configure the nodes and resources, and set up the interface with your application. The elements are pretty succinct. Nodes are a set of workflow objects that behave in prescribed ways. Links are the connective tissue of the flow and tell the flow where to go next. Resources are your humans that still need to interact with workflow if you actually design it that way. Actions are a shared pool of changes and notifications that different flows can use for the same owner table. They are triggered by a specific node in your flow. Conditions are a larger topic as they are both a node and a modifier for other nodes and links. What they produce is a whole world of options for your workflow designs. Every concept has a vocabulary that we need to understand. Workflow and Relay are no different. A flow is simply a business process that is represented by Relay. The end result will usually be a much more detailed chart than the one you would have created in Visio. An instance is an individual execution of a flow for a particular database record. We'll call it an owner. Relationships are ties between the owner record and other data that can also be used in workflow processing. Roles are the resources used by the flow. They include individuals, groups of humans that might be receiving an email or assignment to help an instance continue or to take action directly on the flow. Now we can get into a bit more detail on the nodes that make workflow work. Every process has to start somewhere. In Relay, it starts with a singular node of the same name. There can be only one of these nodes, and they do nothing more than to shepherd the instance into being. Likewise, every process must end eventually. The stop node is just that. It stops the instance and closes out the workflow for that run. There can be many of these in a flow, and they all have the exact same effect. Conditions are forks in the road. They use a condition or a set of conditions to determine which path to take. This node must be connected to no more than 2 child nodes. The output can be linked to the same child node, and there are a few examples as to why you would do that. Task nodes give out assignments. They pause the instance and tell the human or group of humans that something is required. They can use conditions to determine if that action is already done and allow the node to be bypassed. When this type of node is encountered, the user would get a record in their workflow inbox and possibly an email in their email inbox. Once they complete the task, it restarts the instance and the flow continues. Decision nodes are like tasks in that they pause the instance for a human interaction. However, this interaction is for the user to select from a list of options, each representing a link to a different node in the flow. This enables the designer to give users options in the flow while still keeping it simple for the end user. Each option can be conditional at runtime and can be bypassed if only one option is available and the designer actually allows this to happen. The wait node is another way to pause an instance, though not for a user interaction. The wait pauses the instance for a specified time or condition. When the time expires, the flow continues. If the condition is met before the time expires, the flow continues. The wait can also be configured as a condition without a time limit. Action nodes. These trigger actions, of course. No matter if it's a simple value change, an email to be sent, or a method to be run, this node is capable of all of it. In fact, it can execute more than one action per node, in sequence of course, and those actions can also be triggered or not based on, you guessed it, a condition. The matrix node is not something typically found in any traditional workflow. It's designed to limit a scenario where a designer will chain a complex set of condition nodes together to create an intricate web of pathways that can be an interesting situation to maintain or change in future revisions. I tend to call this a cascading condition. Like the decision node, it has multiple outputs, but each must be conditional and evaluated in sequence, with the flow taking the first link that evaluates to true. If none of them do, then it behaves like a condition and takes a predefined negative path. As of the time of this presentation, the subprocess node is not enabled for Relay, but it is designed. This node will provide a number of benefits for future releases of Relay. It will allow flows to be made modular, where the impacts of changing the process can be further reduced. It will also allow parallel processing, where a path can diverge, complete different steps in isolation, and then meet up down the line to continue the whole flow. It will also enable tangent processing, where an instance can trigger another independent instance that does not have to complete for the current instance to continue. The addition of this node will round out the main functionality of Relay to allow for the maximum capability for those that employ workflow in their applications. Relay is implemented for users using Oracle Application Express. The Designer app is central to the design, creation, and management of your workflows. Here are some of the functions a user can expect in the application. The Interface app is one that the developer installs into their workspace and follows steps to allow their application to pass data to it for workflow processing. The developer could also build these functions into their application, but the interface is the quickest and lowest impact method to achieve integration. The application provides an inbox for assignments, a listing of available processes to be started or continued, workflow history for a record, and even more. There is also a simple resource application for those that need to build and maintain their people, groups, and roles for workflow if they don't already have another repository to link to Relay. Next up, we're going to take a look at Relay from a designer perspective and maybe run an instance or two. Alright everybody, as promised, here is your first look at a demo of the Relay Designer. Splash screen is of course a dashboard. In the future this will actually contain some of the metrics that are involved with workflow processing, how fast particular processes are running on average, the number of times a particular node is used in a process, things like that. I want to get into the process list here in a second, but first we're going to go over to the administration tab and we're going to have a look here. So first thing is an easy one, user management. When you are set up on the designer, you actually have the ability to add other users in that can actually build workflows with you. You can also request access to visible schemas and add users that have requested access to yours. This is just a way to allow a designer administrator to manage who's doing what with their particular schema. The next thing here is schema privileges. So unlike Application Express, I have to actually make it to where we can grant access to various objects in your schema in order for workflow to work. So in this case, I've created a couple of functions and other packages that actually allow this to happen, but it allows you as the designer to decide what Relay is allowed to see. So in this case, right here, this is one object that's currently allowed to do full workflow because it's been fully configured for it, but these are the other things that Relay is allowed to see from my test schema. So fairly simple process here as well. You can actually add the different privileges that you want, hit update privileges, and it'll come back and show that you've got them. So as to configuring a object to be used in workflow as an owner, you would actually come in here and fill out the information for that object itself, including giving it, identifying what the primary key is for that table, the resource owner list, that could be your schema or another schema altogether. And it's important to note here that if you have a centralized list of people and groups and roles that you want to use, you can actually just build a set of views and actually allow Relay to see those as well. And down in here you can just go through and select them all along the way. Disabling an object of course makes it to where none of the workflows will actually run, but we'll get into that a little bit more in the future. Cancel out of that, and that's pretty much what's there at the moment. So now we're going to get over into the process list, and this is kind of the heart of the designer. And as you can see, I've got a lot of them here because a lot of this is unit testing along the way. I'm going to show you what those are. They're just basic unit tests where I'm testing one node at a time, making sure everything works. And this is just the canvas page. Alright, so back out here, we'll go take this process because it has nothing in it, and we'll do a real quick build. So we're going to get our start node, and we're going to put a couple of conditions in place, a couple tasks, put a matrix node out there, let's put a decision node, a couple actions, a wait, and let's go ahead and put multiple stops. Okay, so that quick, they're all out there. And if you want to try to configure the nodes before you save them, it's not going to let you. So obvious protection there. So let's dig into this a little bit. So in the slides I mentioned one particular issue where you could have a complex set of condition nodes that are interlaced with one another, where they form essentially a cascade. And at times I've seen these get really big and really ugly in other workflow programs. And then they become kind of ugly and unmanageable. So let's get that done right there. Okay, so got that there. So the matrix node is one of those ones that was designed to make that a little bit better. Let's move the stops over here for a moment. Let's play out our actions, tasks, others. And so instead of creating individual records in the database, all you're really doing is, well, drawing. You can throw these things in, and basically, I probably shouldn't have drawn such a big one, but that's okay because it's fun. Take that to a stop, and take that to that stop, and take that, and take another thing off of this decision to that action, take it to there, and we'll just go ahead and get rid of that. Okay, so real quick, we've taken a bunch of nodes, put them on a palette, connected them up, and so now we want to save it before we can configure it. And so this is a two-step process. So we're going to prep it, save it. When it comes back, it's going to be in pretty colors. And what you can see is that you've got all of your nodes here. You can still move them around. There was an issue that I'm trying to work out with the actual connecting lines, where you can actually reposition the line along the different connectors in between. Oh, I'll get that fixed soon. So when we dig into these particular nodes, we're going to be seeing that we can actually see the node type, the name of it. This can be changed. You can add descriptions, and then you can see what they're connected to. And in this case, you've got a tab here for output nodes. That's what those things are going to lead to, and this is what leads to them. And what these two tabs basically give you the ability to do is navigate the chart without really closing the actual data of each node. You click into it, it'll take you to the next node, take you to the next node, and all along the way you see all these different bits and pieces that need to be configured. So of course decisions need to have assignments configured for them, and we'll dig into more of that as we get to some of the specific examples. But for now, we're going to have them close that out and take a look at what else we've got here on the Canvas screen. So the first button over here is the process data. This is the basic data of the process itself. So when you create a new one, it's going to take you directly to this screen. You're going to fill out the process name, give it a description, tell it what schema owns it, what table you want. It's going to keep track of your process revisions. And in this case, it's enabled, and all these different buttons here work. When you create a new process, it's not going to let you enable it until you've actually gone through and done a validation of the process. Go ahead and close that and look at the process variables. And just like any kind of PL SQL that you may have written before, this is an area that just allows you to predefine some things that Relay will keep track of for you during an actual instance of the workflow. You can actually pre-populate them with default values, and they can be updated along the way. And again, we'll get into that more as we get to the specific examples. So cancel out of that, close that out. The enabled applications. Now, this one is where you basically tell Relay where these processes are allowed to run. And when we actually start looking at running the processes, you'll see that there's a list of processes that you can run, and it's based on this information here: what application, what the alias is, what the page number is, what the workflow item is on the page that's going to take that owner ID from. And cancel that for right now. Get to the object attributes. This is just for reference. This is what the owner table is made of. It's basic DDL for it. The object relationships is actually more complex because it feeds into the substitution variables that you can build dynamically here. They're based off of relationships that you define, and then you can basically say, go in and start building these chains that will then be evaluated later on. And once you've created them, you have the ability to add functions, create this variable that you can then use in your condition or your email templates, and it'll be replaced with actual data at runtime. Close that out. Object actions, this is a pool of different actions that are set up for the actual table that is enabled for workflow. These can be shared amongst multiple workflow processes and can be run individually. And they're really just some basic components where you can set a value, send an email, run a function or a procedure, and then save. Email templates, again, pretty basic. It's just the information that's needed to be able to send an email dynamically from workflow, and these emails come out of those object actions. And jumping into those, you can see that this is where some of those variables come into play, where you can see them being used. The next bit here, the ability to export processes is kind of essential for having any kind of workflow designer that you test first. So in this case, it exports it as a JSON file. See if I can actually save it and then open it up. And here you'll see that it's definitely all in one line. So if you want to see this in greater detail, you'll have to find a formatter. And the good thing is there's plenty of them out there. Alright, so close that out. Revising a process basically takes the current process that you have, slaps a new revision number on it, and allows you to alter it. So once a process has been enabled and is running, you cannot change it in Relay. You have to actually create a revision for it. This is mainly because you don't want to change a process while you have active instances. The system basically says that when you create a revision and you've finished working on it, you've finished putting it together, then you enable that process and you activate it, and it's now accepting new instances where the old one is still running old instances through it. And as that old one empties out, then you'll be able to actually shut it down and or remove it however you like. But the revision process has really been put in place there to make sure that that continuity is maintained between instances. The duplication of a process is kind of the same thing as a revision, except this one basically creates a brand new process that has its own revision history and can be run separately. Validating a process, this is just all of the different bits and pieces that the system looks at before you're allowed to enable it. So if I run this, it's going to fail because things have not been done, and it's going to tell you all the little things that have to be considered before you can enable the process. And so at the moment, that is it. That is the first look at the Relay Designer and what it can be capable of. Obviously, there's still some rough spots to be hammered out, but I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will post a new video as soon as I can. Thank you much. Do you like what you've seen in this video and want to know more? Please reach out online at any of the resources listed, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.